Thanks. I'm really humbled by that introduction and by just being here today. Um, thanks to Dean Rutherford and all the staff. And as he said, thank you to, I have a lot of friends in the audience, both from Rhodes and from colleagues from the Clinton School and from Arkadelphia. So I'm really appreciative of a friendly crowd of familiar faces. I think with so many people in the audience who have known me for a while, Walmart is not where anybody would have predicted I would be, including myself. This was not the kind of career trajectory that I envisioned. I did soup kitchen work and nonprofit work at Rhodes. That was where I was going to end up. That was the vision, the plan, all of those things. And then it's the people in this room who kind of shaped it along the way. It's actually a public program that planted the seed while I was here. Tom Mars, who was then general counsel at Rhodes, at Walmart, spoke while I was a student, and he talked about the role he had taken as general counsel to help diversify the legal field by choosing contracts and contracting with firms that were hiring partners and diversifying the leadership of their firms, and how corporations could be social actors for change. It wasn't actually something I'd thought a lot about, believe it or not. CSR was actually still fairly new and getting a lot of attention, but not necessarily as developed as it would be now. And then I started to kind of think about graduation, and I met with Dean Rutherford, and he offered some advice. He said, you should do something fun. That's not a bad plan. You want to enjoy your job. And he said, I'm going to send your resume a couple of places. Can I send it to Walmart? And I kind of looked at him like he was crazy, but said, sure, I need a job. And it turned, I think it got forwarded. My old boss, who just retired, Margaret McKenna, who had just started as the president, tells the story that she got it from a couple of people in a couple of days. It just kind of kept getting back to her. I had done a fellowship in philanthropy out of college, in many parts thanks to Professor Lanier, who's here. And I took history of philanthropy with him and started thinking about that as a role. And so when you see a resume in philanthropy, it goes to the foundation in a corporate world. She was just starting and said, will you come have lunch with me? The week that they offered to have lunch was the week I was graduating. So I said, of course, I need a job. And I went online, like we're all taught to do, to prepare for our interview. I started doing research. And it was hard to figure out what the Walmart Foundation was doing. I could find little things. I found that they were the largest corporate cash contributor in the world. I could find that they had done some work after 9/11 to help veterans. And I could find their support for Children's Miracle Network and children's hospitals, which was all really important work, but I didn't really understand how it was all coming together, and what this would look like to maximize the social change. So I went. I had lunch. If anybody's been in Walmart cafeteria, they really woo you there. It looks like a high school cafeteria. They roll out the red carpet for everybody. You get to eat in the cafeteria. Margaret and I sat and had a 3-hour lunch, and talked about her vision, talked about how she was kind of a non-traditional hire for the company, or at least what people envisioned to be a non-traditional hire. I've since learned it's not at all out of the norm. There are a lot of us that never envisioned being in corporate America that are working there. And she talked about kind of what she wanted to do, which was take a company who had just committed to sustainability and replicate that and really put the social change magnified amount. And I came back, and there was a reception that night for the graduates, and Skip came over and said, how'd it go? And I said, I think I'm going to work at Walmart. And it was really just a confusing answer to me, because that's not what I expected coming back. But advice kept ringing, and I had lunch with some of the students beforehand, and some advice that Mike Hemphill had given me, for those of you who know him, the associate dean when I was here. He said, find somebody to work for who believes in you and wants to grow you. And you believe in their vision. And that's what I had, and still do. I have a new boss, but I feel just as strongly about her. And that's been a really tremendous experience. So my first day at Walmart, I was handed a press release. It was February 25th, which, is actually Global Philanthropy Day. I know everybody's got their calendars marked, but it's the time when foundations release kind of their annual report, their press release that says what they did over the past year, that kind of thing. So I was handed a press release, and it talked about how much Walmart had given, and said, it was again the largest cash contributor in the nation or the world. But it didn't talk anything about the impact that money had. And I really believed that philanthropy wasn't about giving, it was about the change the money creates. The money is just kind of the vessel. And so Margaret and I talked about that, along with a number of members of the staff. And we talked about moving from kind of check writing philanthropy, which I think is used too often, but to one that was focused on impact that really moved the needle, was the catchphrase for a while, whatever cliche you want to use. And so we started talking to nonprofits, and one of the things that just really confused me, but was such a privilege, was as a student, I would call people to say, I want to learn about your nonprofit, and I'd maybe get to talk to somebody. Once I said, this is Julie Gerke and I'm calling from the Walmart Foundation, I talked to their executive directors. I'd ask for a program person and the executive director would answer the phone. Which has been a humbling experience because I get to talk to a huge number of people who I've admired in the field for a long time and pick their brain. For a long time, we went around saying, if you had $100 million, what would you do to create change in the country? It's a question we didn't get a lot of good answers to. And I think that was really kind of disheartening, is there are a lot of people who I have a huge amount of respect for who are really good at defining the problem. And that's an important part. You've got to know the problem. But once you said, how do I tactically make a difference on this problem, their ideas really stopped. Or it was give it to me. Give it to my organization, which is important, but that wasn't kind of the question we were asking. The other thing I found is Walmart is the largest seller of everything. So, from bikes to diabetes, we'd hear cases that we were the largest seller, so we should be doing this. And that didn't narrow the field for us, because everybody could make a case that we were the best choice for them. We were searching for what, I had spent some time talking to colleagues in this field, and I was searching for, I talked to somebody from Starbucks, and of course they invest in coffee growers. That's, just natural. I talked to Home Depot, they invest in Habitat for Humanity. These things that just make a natural alignment in people's head. And Walmart just didn't have one in our brains, at least at first. They'd done the work on sustainability, and we're a little bit, about 2 years into that when I joined, and promised to be to work toward being zero waste, and some really, great audacious goals. They'd done what I talked about with Tom Mars in the legal department, but somehow we didn't, in the foundation, back up and say, what made those work? Why is this successful? Instead, we went ahead and make mistakes of our own. And at Walmart, you don't make small mistakes, you make them at scale. So I made $1 million mistake. And that's pretty scary I was probably 28 and made $1 million mistake. But we tried to sell a book in stores that a percentage of the profits would go to a nonprofit that was doing great work. We thought we were going to have reading hours and have to, set the world record for the most people reading on this day. But somehow I forgot what a Walmart looks like on a Saturday. Nobody wants to take their kids to have a reading hour there. It's a busy place. We had forgotten what the company was, what our core assets were, what our core strengths were, and instead tried to be something that probably didn't make sense. I hadn't listened to the business, learned enough. It was a great program. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. It didn't make sense for us. And it was interesting. I thought about it, and I had spent, a year at this point listening to executives and various associates who I had a lot of respect for tell me how to do my job who had no background in nonprofit. Yet I didn't listen to the business people who understood the business in making my decisions. So a little bit of a reality check there. When we sold like 500 books, and that's not enough in Walmart world. As an independent bookseller, that would be great, probably. When you've got over 4,000 stores, that's not enough. But I think if we had been paying attention, we would have noticed that Walmart was starting to figure out and really making progress on what it now calls Live Better. We had recently become the world's largest grocery, and we're increasingly being thought of as a grocery store by people as opposed to kind of general merchandise. The recession was starting, and people were really starting to struggle with basic needs. Not that there always haven't been people struggling with this, but the world's attention and the numbers were growing. And we kept coming back to that. This is where Walmart is who people turn to for basic needs. They believe in everyday low cost. They really do try to pass that on to their customers. We were kind of tiptoeing around hunger at this point, and we did a little market research, which I've only started to understand, really. I can save everybody a lot of money. If you want to know what America cares about and what its top priority is, it's education. Nobody has a way to solve it. Everybody then, how you fix it becomes the argument. But our top priority as a nation is education, and that makes sense. But these market researchers were a lot smarter than me. They asked the second question, which was what makes sense for Walmart to solve? And we got a totally different answer. Education fell kind of to the bottom because it's not who people associate us with, and hunger came to the top. They did associate us as a grocer, as somewhere people turn who are struggling to make ends meet. And every demographic, every, socioeconomic class, everybody kind of had this association. And then the logic started to work. If you hear somebody talk about hunger who's just giving kind of the overview, they'll talk about it as the 360-degree approach, and it is Walmart's now kind of much more articulated approach to social change, where you put the social problem in the middle and you think about all the assets and you surround the social problem with the assets of the company beyond check writing. We didn't call it that at that point. It all sounds very nice now. It's retroactive sense making. We're making it sound like we had it all figured out from the beginning. And probably sustainability did. And if we had talked to them a little more, we share offices, we should, but we would have known that. So once we put hunger, particularly U.S. hunger, in the middle, because hunger is so different as a global issue than a domestic problem, we recognized how many spokes of the wheel we could have. So the company had quietly started donating food as a pilot about 2 years before I started. They had donated 9 million pounds of food as a pilot through Sam's Club. So that's the kind of scale you get when you just run a pilot. We worked with logistics and all these people to scale that pilot, and within 2 years we donated 257 million pounds of food. It's still growing. All the supercenters are now on the retail pickup program with food banks, but there's certainly work to be done with some of the other formats. One of the things I'm most proud of is that, and there are people from the food bank in the audience who I see who can talk about it, but the mix of food Walmart was able to give is, the last time I checked, was 45% was produce, dairy, and meat, which is not what food banks typically get. And so this was, a healthy mix that got people what they needed. And that was enabled by another spoke of the chain. Food banks are good at food transport, but Walmart fundamentally is a logistics company. We do retail, but why we're successful is our logistics. So our logistics team had invented a fast freeze process that they basically gave away to anybody who wanted it, that allowed us to take milk off the shelves, fast freeze it, get it to a food bank, and make it safe, prolong the life that's safe. And then really, we basically said, go volunteer, go do skills-based volunteerism in food banks. And, it's not been coordinated by me. We could probably do a better job aligning it, but the passion of our Walmart's logistics team is pretty incredible. I run into food bank directors all the time who can name their nearest distribution center's manager and say 4 times a year they come in and they lay out our shelves, they give us the freezers that are left over, they tell us how customers should shop, they look at our routes of our trucks and help us be more efficient in our routing. These are things that are just kind of their core competency that food banks are good at, but don't have the ability to invest in like Walmart. So the more we can give that away, the better. We also, that's skills-based volunteerism, but as we chose hunger, it made sense. I have 1.4 million colleagues in the US alone. Hunger is in every community, and anybody can work on it. So our associates get incredibly passionate about social, helping in their community volunteering. Working in a food bank or at a soup kitchen doesn't take a lot of training. You can show up and do good work. While some issues, volunteering is a commitment that requires a lot of training and various things, this is one that made sense for our associates to get involved in, and we could kind of build an army of support without a lot of work. The other thing we have, which is kind of the fourth spoke, is customers. 140 million families are in and out of Walmart every week, which is just a kind of incredible number that I've had to kind of grapple with scale and learn in a whole new way. In the nonprofit world, scale is not 140 million people a week. And we're still working on customers, and we've got a lot of work to do to engage and kind of build that movement. Hopefully you'll see some things in the spring. But also, we've done things like thinking about crowdsourcing philanthropy. So that's where you all go online and vote. The technical term that people use in the industry is crowdsourcing philanthropy. You'll notice when we do that, which we do, we don't say vote for one of these organizations. There are a lot of great organizations, but that's just not our model, because what we're trying to do is build a movement or an echo. So how we did it a year ago is we did it by the 100 hungriest communities in the US. And you voted by your local community if you were in one of those. And why we did that is because once you voted, you then got a list of places where you could volunteer, a list of places where you could donate that are your local community. So I had the privilege of flying to Salt Lake City, which is who won the $1 million last year. And I will fully admit, technical problems, lots of issues for those but Salt Lake City won. And in talking to their food bank director, the outcomes were a lot more than, he said, that $1 million we won for the community is amazing, but that is a small piece of what we've gotten out of this campaign. We had newscasters and professional basketball teams talking about hunger and saying, go vote for Salt Lake City. Hunger was top of mind in our community for a solid month. Our fundraising over the past month is double what it was a year ago. We have new donors because of this. And we have a long list of people who want to volunteer who have never been involved in hunger issues. And I think that's the kind of, when you unlock that echo that's much more than Walmart, is when we're serving as a catalyst as opposed to kind of a philanthropist, which hopefully we can do more. And we've got a lot more to do with customers. Grant making, which is kind of the first thing you think of when you think of the Walmart Foundation, is the other spoke. And there we think about both complementing kind of our strengths, but also doing innovation. So in complementing our strengths, we do things like refrigerated trucks that we can buy at a cheaper price and give to nonprofits and help retail pick up, whether it's from Target or, we want food banks to get food. We don't care if it's from Walmart. Everybody, solving issues like hunger will take everybody. It's not a competitive space. And then we also think about innovation, and actually in Little Rock is one of my favorite grants. I don't know if anybody here who's worked on the universal in-classroom breakfast work that's going on in the schools. Lily Bowie, your food director, has been really involved and is wonderful. But that was, when we were talking to all these people about hunger, we would hear these kind of, all these, you know, from nutrition education to emergency food, and inevitably I'd sit there and somebody at the end would whisper, it was like it was a secret. If you really want to make a difference, you should do universal in-classroom breakfast. And they were previous educators often, or people who had spent time in the schools. And I started reading about it, or I'd say, tell me why. And there's a reason we tell parents to feed their kids breakfast on testing week. They have better educational outcomes. The studies actually show that there's reduced obesity. They pay attention, they aren't tardy. All these issues that schools have, if you bring breakfast into the classroom in the morning, it helps. So Little Rock is actually one of the pilot sites for that. We're now doing it in 15 sites, 15 cities and districts around the nation. But I think while there's lots of controversy, you can read about it in Chicago, it can be done poorly. Well managed, it's a really great program. So that's the kind of grant making we do, is kind of innovation and complement, scale and growth. We also are working on policy, which is something not a lot of corporations will go near. We have a pretty strong and big public policy team, public affairs team, which is, most corporations do. I think ours is one of the larger. But when you start getting them to say an anti-hunger issue is an issue they're willing to lobby on, that's not necessarily in the best interest of the company. I mean, it's good and we believe in it, but to spend part of their precious time with legislators talking about hunger issues, I think changes the dynamic of the conversation from something those kind of food bank and activists want to something that's a corporate issue as well and should be important to everybody. We're working with groups like Share Our Strength and No Kid Hungry, which Governor Beebe has really supported locally, to do things like expand summer food. So 1 in 20 kids who eat lunch in the free and reduced lunch program get lunch during the summer. How do we get more sites and more kids in those programs? Because they're losing track. They're losing momentum in the summer. And that's, you know, a public-private partnership issue. And then the last spoke I'm going to talk about is suppliers. The grocery and food business, we think, should be involved in this. And so we have a lot of work to do, but how do we convene a conversation that makes us all smarter investors in hunger rather than just kind of, you know, the extra food we have or whatever, which is great and needed, but it needs to be more than that. And so we're starting a corporate conversation on that. So we now call that a 360-degree approach, and it all adds up to our $2 billion commitment that Vina talked about and Skip talked about, and feels more unified. And I think because of this type work and work of a lot of colleagues I have, it's, you know, the work's been going on much broader and bigger than me, and before I was there. But the CEO has, he talks a lot about what the next generation of Walmart will look like. And I can't name all 4 pillars, I'm sorry, I should be able to. But one of them is making social change on issues customers care about. So for the Fortune 1 company CEO to have 4 things he talks about and that be one of them, to me is pretty amazing. And tells you the priority that's placed on this within Walmart. It's part of the mission statement now. You know, we went to save money, live better, and that's that live better side. And I think it's a model that I'm seeing lots of corporations undertake. It's kind of the next evolution of CSR is, you know, instead of one thing I'm doing on one path, how do I bring all my assets to the table and really think about driving change? And I'm hopeful about that, I think. But I will say, I'm sure there are a lot of nonprofits in the audience, it means a lot of no's, because it means you only do things that really align with your strengths. And it means finding the corporations that are going to have more than a check to give you. But I think that actually will be a much more fruitful process when you find the right partner. So hopefully, you know, candidates that I interview now go to our website and see a little more and have a little more sense. When I talk to them, typically I feel like they're a little more informed. So issues that we're approaching this way include sustainability and hunger, nutrition, which Walmart is talking a lot about today and tomorrow. How do we help customers buy healthy food in the grocery store? Eliminate price premiums, make it simple to understand what's better. There are lots of things we can do in that space. Women's economic empowerment, how do we use our global supply chain to empower women throughout it? These are the kinds of things that we're talking about that are much broader than support for a nonprofit, which is an essential piece. These are our partners, they're the key allies, they're our key critics who we need to hear from and invite in to hear how we can do better. But it's the kind of hope that I have, and hopefully when people come visit, they have a little broader sense of what Walmart does as a social actor. So, yep.
First of all, don't you think Walmart had a great hire? All right, let's ask, we have time for questions. Would you raise your hand and we'll get the microphone to you. Here, Mr. Dietz, I'll bring this. Oh, no, there's Caroline, she's right there. Arnie, hold it up closer to you. It's not on.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
I can.
As I said, Margaret McKenna, when she was head of the foundation, the headquarters was in Boston. She retired.
Right.
And then, I don't know, is the office still in Boston or is it in Bentonville now?
So I will say, Margaret was based in Boston, but headquarters was always Bentonville. She had an office of one that I worked out of when I was her basically in Boston, and she was here a week a month. So Sylvia Matthews Burwell, who many people in the audience may know because she was involved in the Clinton administration and others, started 3 weeks ago as president, and she has relocated from Seattle. She had been at Gates and is living in Bentonville. So we now have one staff member based outside of Bentonville, and they're in Washington, D.C. But the majority of the staff has always been in Bentonville.
Further questions? Got one over here. Okay. Go ahead.
Julie, thank you for being here. You need to give me some ammunition.
Okay.
I have some wonderful debates with some friends of mine about whether or not one should shop at Walmart.
Sure.
I happen to be on the pro side for a lot of reasons, but would you give me your answer to that question?
Sure. I think, so I did a lot of research when I took this job. I wanted to understand all the pros and cons. I think, people are using a social change model that I learned here, which is if you kind of focus on the biggest and they change, everybody else will too. But the distinctions, when you look at the distinctions between Target and Walmart or various things, they aren't that significant. I think actually you could make a case that these kinds of models of social change are what Walmart is doing, and Target's doing some good work, but it's different and it's not quite as holistic. And I want to be clear that I work for the foundation, I'll get in over my head real quick on some of the numbers. But we pay competitive wages to union wages in every city. Benefits packages are competitive. It's been a really interesting thing for me so I've always thought of myself as an advocate for low-income individuals. It's been really interesting for me to talk to critics, which I do a lot, because I want to hear that side. I have never, or very, very rarely, do I hear from a low-income individual who doesn't want a Walmart in their community. The people who come talk to me are people who can afford to make can afford to shop at Whole Foods or various places. Those are the ones who don't want Walmart. I spend a lot of time in the hunger community, clearly, and I spent some time with a group called Witnesses to Hunger, which is a great group out of Philadelphia. And they're people who have been hungry, are hungry themselves, and are involved in kind of documenting that and telling the story. And it's, they talked about how revolutionary Walmart is for their lives. Some of them have worked there at previous times. These are people who are actually the advocates. And it's interesting, as somebody who likes to think of themselves as an advocate for low-income Americans, that to pretend that I know better than they do about what's good for their life is a tough situation for me to swallow.
Got a question right over here.
Great presentation. Our local Sam's has gotten out of the tobacco business recently, and I understand that in 2009 there was discussion at Walmart about the possibility of getting out of the tobacco business.
Yeah.
Is that, do you have an opinion, or is that moving forward, or do you know anything about it?
So I actually don't know. I knew that's a question, so asked some questions internally before I came. I think questions are always ongoing, and every store looks at what they sell based on kind of demand. That is what it is. And I think there's some parallels to the work in nutrition, because that's what I know better. I'm involved in those conversations. So you've got, a whole grocery here. Walmart would like people to eat better for themselves. They're going to do things like reformulate processed food and work with suppliers to take sodium and trans fats out of food. Make it easy for consumers to buy it so that there's a logo that makes it really simple with approved criteria that everybody feels good about, and make it simple to choose between which pasta is better for you or whatever, and eliminate the price premium. But we aren't going to stop selling junk food. Consumers have choice. And I think the company would like people to make healthy choices, anti-tobacco products, cheap on the shelves, like people to make healthy choices. But I will say it's a company that believes in the power of the consumer.
Yes, Jerry, right here. Here comes the microphone coming in.
I'm sure you had some sense of going to the dark side when you went to work for Walmart. I spent 37 years in corporate America, some on the philanthropy side, but there is an education, both of your education and their education. But this is more about corporate philanthropy than maybe Walmart. But I'm current chair of the Arkansas Community Foundation, and they give an annual corporate philanthropy award. And corporate philanthropy in Arkansas is on the upswing, but there's a lot of small companies, and they don't really know how to do it. So could you reflect on shrinking your understanding of Walmart down to smaller companies? But it's a high priority for the Arkansas Community Foundation because it is an important thing, but it's pretty unformulated and still a lot of education.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I would say, while you work with small companies, I work with some household names who are in similar positions. Now, they aren't Walmart size, but I get calls every week from very much large companies who are in a similar boat. I think you've got to realize what you're good at and what's really important to you. For a lot of corporations, that starts with education in the community they need to hire in. They need a trained workforce in their location, and they need high quality of life for recruiting in their location. So those are two things that I feel like most of corporate America has come around to and embraced. But beyond that, I think Starbucks and coffee, whatever it is, what do you have more of and do better than anybody else? Or are you trying to as a company? Even if it's for your location. And that's where you need to be working, where you can kind of ripple. And we've found, and studies say this too, when you get your employee base involved in change and they feel like they're using their expertise, it's much more rewarding than when they're volunteering on something that has nothing to do with their expertise. We all like to do what we're good at. Helps retention, all those things. But if you don't choose something aligned with your company and your skills, you won't be able to do that. It'll always be tangential. So I think it's focusing on what you're good at and what assets you have.
Right, we have a question. Pat, right, we have to stay right behind you, Pat.
An earlier question started towards this, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper. So you had said, you talked about corporate social responsibility and how important that is to a corporate image. You talked about Walmart selling most of everything. You talked about how it can impact hunger and social change. So when I go and I start thinking about the #1 retailer, this goes to the question about tobacco products. So Walmart does sell the most
Yep.
number of cigarettes both in the country and I don't know in the world. Probably China beats Walmart on that one yet. But then when I think there's many studies that have been done in low and middle income countries demonstrating that people in low SES spend more money on tobacco than they do on food. And it ends up having malnutrition for particularly the women and the children. So I'm wondering, as you're looking at corporate social responsibility, doing the right thing and moving forward, using tobacco isn't really a choice because it's an addiction. It's a very expensive one. In Arkansas, the average Arkansan spends about $2,000 a year with an average income somewhere around $34,000. So a very substantial spend of their money. So if the largest corporation, as you said, makes a change, the others will follow. So is that something that actually Walmart could be working with in partnering with a tobacco control so that they could stop selling the product that kills?
So I actually can't speak to how the business chooses what to sell. In the way that's where my $1 million mistake came from, is thinking I could. I think the product assortment is looked at all the time. I don't understand smoking enough to be an expert, but I do know that demand is filled by the market. And so, I think the more we can make it easy to quit and offer products in store that are affordable to make quitting easier and more affordable is also part of the solution. So I can't speak to whether, I think choice will always, as long as there's demand and legality, I don't know what that conversation looks like.
Okay, yes, Pat, right here.
This is the only school of public service, as I understand. And since many people here are involved with the school, students or faculty, did you feel that your training here was very substantial and helped you in fulfilling this job that you received?
I actually had the privilege of having lunch with some students before this, and they asked a similar question. And I would say there are a lot of people from Rhodes in the audience as well, and Rhodes and the Clinton School were a nice compliment. I think the most important skill that I look for when I hire is critical thinking and strong communication skills, which clearly liberal arts schools value, and try to teach at a massive, if you don't come out of there with that, you haven't paid attention. But then I also use a lot of the things, we were talking about logic models and evaluation, and a lot of the things we talk about a lot at the Clinton School that I use every day. If my staff doesn't draw a logic model on their grants, I'm asking the questions. So while we may not be overtly using them, we are talking about the things I learned every day. And the social change theories I talk about all the time. So.
Yes, right here. Wait for the mic.
You mentioned your vendor network, which of course is a great part of your infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Are you involved with the international vendor network, and what overlap does your work have to do with?
So I did some international grant making when I first started, and that's actually one of the reasons I was hired, was my international background. But I don't work a lot with the vendors. I've been a part of the conversations about sourcing and how we move women through the supply chain to greater value. Nonprofits call it the value chain, moving women up the value chain. So that, and I've worked with groups like CARE International, who The grant I know the best is with cashew farmers in India. So women are traditionally the growers and pickers, but not the owners of the land or the processors. And there are cooperatives that we helped fund that do that, which now actually are closing the loop, and why Walmart should be in these kinds of spaces are sold in Walmarts. Now then, they aren't marked anyway. They're competed through the competitive process. But I think when we are in smart places, we complete the cycle and really are able to use, philanthropic investments that do empower people holistically.
Yes, sir. Yep, right back here.
On is better. I think everyone in this room is proud of this school, obviously proud of its graduates, and is proud of Walmart. And the question I wanted to ask you is sort of personal, but I know of a small foundation in Illinois that's administered by school nurses, and it's an adjunct to Hunger. But they can tell by the students who come in their class and show up in the same clothes every day, and they very quietly, I don't know exactly how, take these children to their local Walmart, and out of this foundation that's very small, buy them clothes. And I assume if somebody doesn't have clothes, they're probably hungry too. So I guess my question is there a way for Walmart to still make small matching grants, and do they apply to you or to the local store?
Sure.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to say a couple of things. First, Walmart's one of the only people who've preserved this, where every store has philanthropic dollars to invest in their local community. The application is online, but basically the foundation would choose, the store address that's their local store and could apply for funding to support that. The story you told is one I hear all the time. Teachers are spending over $200 a year on average out of their pocket to feed kids. You hear about it for school supplies and those kinds of things, but teachers keep a drawer of snacks in their desk as well that they're feeding kids. And I talked to a kid who I was just kind of talking to about his experience of hunger, and he described it as a monster in his belly on Monday morning, because that's where he's getting food, is at school. It's backpack programs that I'm sure our local organizations here do, where kid shows up, gets a backpack without stigma, takes it home, it has food for the weekend. That is a part of the solution here. It's organizations like you're talking about, and it's going to take kind of a whole coalition surrounding these kids to make that work.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sherry Coote with Family Promise of Pulaski County. And first, I want to commend the audience today, because the last time I attended one of these programs, somebody had a heart attack. And the ambulance arrived. And it was,
Oh my God.
remember that? So, way to go, crowd.
Yeah, I was going to say, your health is a priority.
Woo! We serve homeless families with children in a network of churches, and truly one of our biggest problems is obesity. I mean, with the foundation, fund programs, I think that that's one of the things that we could be doing, educating our families on, they'd have better jobs, they'd have better opportunities if that obesity were eradicated. So applying for those types of things. It's kind of, I don't know that it's the opposite of hunger. I don't think that it is.
Nope.
But it's,
I think that's actually something that's not talked about enough in the obesity epidemic, is that in the U.S., hunger and obesity are often two sides of the same thing. It's those suffering from hunger that are often obese. They aren't getting the right mix of food, the right access to healthy food. There's some recent research that it's something like 74% of low-income mothers want to feed their kids healthier. They don't know, I don't know how to cook. We've lost this cooking skills. It's going to be much more than kind of a quick solution. But yeah, sure. I mean, I think we all make choices that aren't that healthy for us. I had a cookie for breakfast this morning, I'll admit. Kristen.
I had a piece of king cake that Laura Crosby brought in terms of Mardi Gras, and it was fabulous.
So it's certainly not just a low-income problem.
Let me say this, because I know there's a lot of, and I've had several people come up to me and say they want to visit with Julie afterwards. And we, you know, she's just incredible. And we saw that when she came to the Clinton School. In 2007, we started an award at graduation for the student that was a bridge builder, was a person who led people in the class, who brought people together, who raised issues, who found solutions, who did so in a constructive and productive way. And the first recipient of that award was Julie Gerke, and she's exemplified it ever since. And it is so rewarding, you know, this job is fun most days, like any job, but it is the most rewarding part of it is seeing Julie and others doing so well and doing so good at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen, Julie Gerke.
Thank you.